Open it, Evelyn, my mother-in-law said, smiling across my birthday cake. It's something every wife should be prepared for. The room went quiet before I even touched the envelope. I had spent the whole afternoon making dinner for 8, setting out my best white plates, polishing the silverware my mother gave me when I got married, and placing fresh hydrangeas in the center of the table because I still believed birthdays should feel warm, even at 63. The roast had come out just right. The candles were lit. My husband, Daniel, had even kissed my cheek when he walked in, carrying a bakery box from the little place downtown that made the lemon cake I loved. For a few hours, I let myself believe this year would be different. That maybe, just maybe, his mother would behave like a guest instead of a judge. Margaret Hale sat at the far end of the table in a pale blue sweater set, pearls at her throat, posture perfect as always, like she'd stepped out of a country club luncheon instead of into my dining room. She had arrived 40 minutes late, complained about the parking, criticized the mashed potatoes for being too creamy, and corrected me twice when I told a story about Daniel as a little boy. None of that was new. What was new was the envelope. Cream-colored, heavy paper, my full name written on the front in her sharp, slanted handwriting. I laughed softly when she slid it toward me, because what else was I supposed to do? You brought me paperwork for my birthday? I asked, trying to make it sound playful. My sister-in-law gave a nervous little chuckle. Daniel stared at his plate. Margaret lifted her wine glass and smiled wider. Go on, she said. It's just a joke. I opened the flap carefully, because my hands had already started to feel strange. Inside was a stack of papers clipped neatly together. The first page hit me before I could fully process the words. Petition for dissolution of marriage. My name. Daniel's name. County filing language. Legal terms. Paragraphs about assets, residency, and irreconcilable differences. For a second, I honestly thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I looked down again. Same words. Same cold language. The kind of language that doesn't belong next to birthday candles and linen napkins. My throat tightened, but I kept my face still. Across from me, Margaret let out a bright little laugh. Oh, don't look so serious, sweetheart. We all need a sense of humor. I heard someone at the table shift in their chair. Fork against china. Ice settling in a glass. No one else laughed. That was somehow worse. I turned my head slowly and looked at Daniel, waiting for him to say something. Anything. To tell her she'd gone too far. To take the papers from my hand. To remind everyone that this was my birthday, in my home, at my table. But Daniel only rubbed the back of his neck and gave me a tired half-smile. You know how Mom is, he said. Just like that. As if humiliation had a personality. As if cruelty became harmless if you wrapped it in a familiar voice. I folded the papers once. Then again. Set them beside my plate. Picked up the cake knife. Well, I said, smiling so gently my own voice scared me. We shouldn't let dessert get cold. And in that moment, while Margaret watched me like she was waiting for me to crack, I realized something that settled into my chest like ice water. If those papers were meant to make me feel small, they had done something else instead. They had told me exactly what kind of room I was sitting in. And for the first time in a long time, I understood that the most dangerous person at my birthday table might not be the woman holding the joke. It might be the one who said nothing at all. I served the cake with the same steady hands I had used to set the table, even though I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. The lemon frosting looked too cheerful under the dining room lights, bright and soft, and completely wrong for the kind of silence that had settled over us. I cut 8 slices, placed them on dessert plates, and passed them around as if nothing unusual had happened. Margaret accepted hers first, of course, with that satisfied little smile she always wore when she believed she had made a point. Thank you, Evelyn, she said, sweet as church music. You always were so good at hosting. I nodded once and moved on. My sister-in-law, Patricia, would not meet my eyes. Daniel took his plate without a word. He had always hated conflict, or at least that was what I had told myself for years. But sitting there in my own dining room, with a stack of divorce papers folded beside my fork, I began to understand that silence was not the absence of choice. Silence was a choice. The rest of the evening passed in that strange, brittle way family gatherings do when everyone knows something ugly has happened, but no one wants to be the first to admit it. Margaret launched into a story about a couple from her country club who had separated after 30 years and how sometimes it is simply healthier to move on. Patricia laughed too late at comments that were not funny. Daniel refilled wine glasses no one had asked him to touch. I listened to every word without really hearing any of it. My attention kept drifting back to the papers at my right hand, to the way the corner of the top page peeked out from beneath my folded napkin, as if the whole night had narrowed into that one sharp little edge. When the last plate was empty and the candles had burned low, Margaret stood, smoothed her sweater, and kissed the air near my cheek. "Do not be so sensitive, darling," she murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. "A woman your age should know how fragile marriage can be." Then she picked up her purse and walked out of my house as if she had brought flowers instead of a warning. The front door closed. The quiet afterward felt enormous. Patricia left 10 minutes later, mumbling something about an early morning appointment. That left just Daniel and me in the kitchen, standing among dirty plates, half-empty wine glasses, and crumbs from my birthday cake. He leaned against the counter and exhaled like he was the one who had survived something difficult. "I know that was awkward," he said. "Awkward." I turned on the faucet and let warm water run over the cake knife before answering. "Your mother gave me divorce papers at my birthday dinner." My voice came out calm, almost detached. "That is not awkward, Daniel. That is deliberate." He rubbed his forehead. "She was joking. You know how dramatic she gets." I set the knife down very carefully. "Then why were they real?" That made him pause. It was only a second, maybe less, but I saw it. A flicker in his face. A hesitation so brief most people would have missed it. I did not. "What do you mean, real?" he asked too quickly. I dried my hands on a dish towel and turned to face him. "I mean county language. I mean legal formatting. I mean our names typed in the right places. I mean someone did not print those off a comedy website." He gave a short laugh that did not belong in the room. "Come on, Evelyn. You are reading too much into it." But he would not look directly at me. He kept glancing toward the envelope on the counter like it might start talking. That was when the last of my doubts slipped away. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just a quiet shift, like a floorboard settling under weight. I reached for the papers, stacked them neatly, and slid them into the kitchen drawer beside the takeout menus and spare batteries. "You are right," I said softly. "I think I need to look at this a little more closely." Daniel nodded, relieved too quickly, already mistaking calm for surrender. He headed upstairs to shower, and I stayed behind in the kitchen, listening to his footsteps fade above me. Then I opened the drawer again, took out the papers, and spread them flat under the pendant light. For the first time that night, I let myself read every line. I read the papers 3 times before I trusted what I was seeing. The kitchen clock above the stove ticked so loudly it felt like it was measuring something more than time. Every page looked polished, deliberate, and expensive. There was nothing playful about any of it. The language was formal, the formatting clean, the kind of legal paperwork that comes from a real office, not a novelty shop or a prank website. Our full names were typed correctly, including my middle initial. Our home address was current. There were references to marital property, individual accounts, and a line that made my stomach tighten when I reached it. Preliminary disclosure pending review. I stood there under the pendant light in my own kitchen, still wearing the navy dress I had chosen for my birthday dinner, and realized that whoever put this together knew more than they should have. I took out my phone and photographed every page, front and back, making sure the corner of each sheet was visible in the frame. Then I zoomed in on the footer of the first page. A law office name. Small print. Easy to miss if you were upset enough not to look. Hale, Turner and Briggs Family Law. I stared at the name Hale for a long moment. It could have been a coincidence. There were thousands of Hales in America, but Margaret had spent decades treating coincidence like a luxury for other people. I opened the junk drawer, pulled out the old reading glasses I only used for recipes and bills, and read it again. Same name, same neat black type. A cold little pressure settled behind my ribs. I slipped the papers into a manila folder, carried it upstairs, and found Daniel in our bathroom brushing his teeth. He looked relaxed. That bothered me more than anything. He had showered, changed into a gray t-shirt, and was standing there like we had just hosted an awkward holiday dinner instead of something much darker. He caught my reflection in the mirror. "You are still on that?" he asked around the toothbrush. I leaned against the doorframe, folder in my hand. "What is Hale, Turner and Briggs?" He stopped brushing, just for a second. Then he spit, rinsed, and shrugged. "No idea. Too smooth. Too fast. That is the firm listed on the papers your mother gave me." I kept my voice even. And unless your mother suddenly started drafting legal documents for fun, someone paid to have them prepared. Daniel wiped his mouth with a hand towel and looked at me like I was the one making the evening unpleasant. Evelyn, for the love of God, not everything is a conspiracy. Then tell me why the paperwork mentions disclosure review. His eyes flicked to the folder. There it was again. That tiny shift. That half-second calculation. Legal jargon, he said. Maybe she downloaded a template. With our current address and account language? He sighed, heavy and annoyed, like a man being inconvenienced by a billing error. You always do this. You turn one stupid thing my mother says into a whole production. The words landed harder than I expected, not because they were cruel, but because they were practiced. This was not a husband trying to comfort his wife after an ugly family moment. This was a man trying to steer her away from a door he did not want opened. I looked at him then, really looked at him, at the way he crossed his arms, at how carefully he avoided the folder, at how he never once said his mother was wrong. All right, I said quietly. Then I will stop making a production. Relief crossed his face so quickly it almost embarrassed him. He kissed my forehead, a gesture so automatic it felt rehearsed, and told me to get some sleep. But after he climbed into bed, I sat in the guest room with the lamp on low, the folder open on my lap, and my laptop balanced on a throw pillow. I typed the law firm name into the search bar. The website came up in less than 3 seconds. Family law, divorce, asset protection, mediation, and at the bottom of the homepage, under the partner bios, I found a familiar name that made me sit perfectly still. Susan Hale, senior partner, Margaret's maiden name. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the guest room until nearly 3 in the morning, the glow from my laptop washing everything in that cold blue light that makes a familiar house feel borrowed. Susan Hale, senior partner. The name sat on the screen like a hand on my shoulder, steady and unwelcome. Margaret had mentioned a cousin in law school years ago. Usually in the same tone, she used to mention people who understood how the world worked. I had never paid much attention. Back then, I still believed her comments were just noise. Background irritation. The kind of thing you learn to live around if you love someone enough. But once I saw that name, the last 10 years of my marriage began rearranging themselves in my mind. Each memory, sliding into a place I had not wanted to see before. The first time Margaret had joked about divorce was 2 weeks after our wedding. We were at brunch in a little place near the marina, the kind with overpriced omelets and tiny jars of jam on the table. Daniel had stepped away to take a call, and Margaret leaned across the table and smiled at me over her coffee cup. Just remember, she had said lightly, in this family, the women who last are the women who know when to leave with grace. I had laughed because I was 20 years younger then and still naive enough to mistake warning signs for eccentricity. A year later, when Daniel and I were house hunting, Margaret insisted on reviewing every listing. She called one neighborhood too far beneath Daniel's future and another too convenient for a woman trying to secure her own nest. I told myself she was controlling because she was lonely. When Daniel asked me to quit my consulting job and help him build his business from home, Margaret praised the idea in public and mocked it in private. Smart women keep their own accounts, Evelyn, she said once while helping me arrange flowers for Thanksgiving. Dependence makes men careless. I should have heard the satisfaction in her voice. I should have asked why she seemed so interested in whether my name was on everything. Instead, I smiled, moved the hydrangeas 2 inches to the left, and told myself some mothers simply had trouble letting go of their sons. Even the way Daniel changed over the years looked different now. Small things at first. He started forwarding fewer financial emails. Then he stopped mentioning quarterly numbers from the business unless I asked directly. He opened a new credit card and said it was for work expenses. Last spring, when I offered to review our retirement documents before tax season, he kissed my cheek and told me not to worry because he had it handled. At the time, I let it pass because I was tired, because my father had been ill, because marriage teaches women to overlook what would sound ridiculous if they said it out loud. But sitting there in the guest room with legal papers in my lap, I remembered another moment so clearly it made my skin go cold. 6 months ago, at Margaret's birthday lunch, she had raised a glass and said, "To second acts. They come for all of us eventually." Everyone smiled politely. Daniel smiled too. I had asked what she meant, and she had only shrugged. "Oh, I just think people cling to old arrangements far longer than they should." At the time, I thought she meant one of her country club friends. Now I knew better. By the time the sky outside the window turned from black to that thin gray color just before dawn, I had stopped asking whether I was imagining things. I closed the laptop, placed the folder on the nightstand, and looked toward the hallway where my husband was sleeping down the hall as peacefully as if nothing in our life had shifted. Then I reached for my phone, scrolled to a name I had not called in months, and pressed dial. If there was one person in Chicago who knew how to separate panic from proof, it was Nina Brooks. Nina answered on the second ring, which was exactly how she had always answered when something mattered. "Evelyn," she said, her voice rough with sleep but instantly alert. "It is 6 in the morning. If you are calling this early, either your house is on fire or someone has finally crossed a line." I looked out the guest room window at the pale Chicago dawn, the neighboring rooftops still silver with last night's chill, and let out a breath I had been holding for hours. "My mother-in-law gave me divorce papers at my birthday dinner," I said. There was a pause. Then Nina spoke in the calm, clipped tone she used when the world stopped being emotional and started becoming evidence. "Tell me everything." By 8:30, I was sitting across from her in the corner booth of a quiet coffee shop on West Madison, the kind of place with exposed brick walls, good espresso, and just enough morning traffic to make private conversations feel hidden in plain sight. I had not told Daniel where I was going. I left a note on the kitchen counter that said I needed air and would be back later. It was the truth, just not all of it. Nina arrived in a charcoal coat with her reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, carrying a legal pad and the expression of a woman who had spent 30 years watching people make expensive mistakes. She had worked as a senior paralegal before retiring 2 years ago, and if there was one thing Nina respected, it was paperwork. I slid the manila folder across the table. She read every page in silence, her eyes moving steadily, one finger tapping lightly against the edge of the stack whenever she saw something she did not like. When she reached the law firm footer, her mouth tightened. When she saw Susan Hale's name in the partner section printout I had brought, she set the pages down and folded her hands. "This is not a joke," she said. "No drama, no hesitation, just fact. Someone paid to have this drafted, or at the very least reviewed by someone who knows exactly how to make it look official." I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup, even though I was not drinking it. "Daniel says I am overreacting." Nina gave me a look over the rim of her glasses that made me feel both comforted and slightly scolded. "Daniel says that because if he admits this is real, then he has to explain what he knows." The words landed with a clarity that almost felt cruel. Not because they were harsh, because they were clean. Clean truth has a way of hurting more than confusion ever does. "So what do?" I asked. Nina pulled the legal pad closer and began writing in neat block letters. "You do not confront anyone. Not yet. You do not accuse. You do not cry. You do not threaten. And for the love of everything holy, you do not sign a single piece of paper anyone hands you." She tore off the page and slid it to me. 3 columns. Financial accounts. Property records. Communication trail. "Start here," she said. "You need to know what exists before you decide what has been hidden." I looked down at the list. It was so practical it steadied me. "I do not even know where to begin with the business records," I admitted. Daniel had built his logistics company from a small consulting operation in our den into something with employees, warehouse contracts, and accounts I had stopped tracking in detail years ago when he told me it was easier if one of us focused on home. Nina nodded as if she had expected that. "Then begin with what they think you already know. Joint checking, mortgage statements, property tax records, insurance policies, email receipts. Look for changes. Look for new account numbers. Look for anything that moved quietly." She leaned back, studying me. "And Evelyn?" "Yes. Pay attention to timing. People like Margaret do not stage humiliation for sport. They do it when they think the ground under you has already shifted." I sat very still after that. Outside, a city bus hissed at the curb. Someone laughed near the register. Cups clinked. The world kept moving like ordinary mornings always do. But inside me, something had sharpened. This was no longer about a cruel birthday stunt. This was about preparation. Planning. A door they believed was already half open. I folded Nina's list, slipped it into my purse, and finally took a sip of coffee that had gone lukewarm. "All right," I said. "Then I think it is time I find out what they moved while I was busy being polite." I spent the rest of that morning moving through my own house like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. That was the strange part. Nothing looked different. The framed photos still lined the hallway. The cream-colored runner still lay flat on the stairs. Daniel's shoes were still by the mudroom bench, one slightly tipped over because he never bothered to place them neatly no matter how many times I asked. The kitchen still smelled faintly of lemon cake and coffee. But once suspicion enters a home, it changes the temperature of every room. I set my purse on the counter, slipped Nina's list out, and began with the easiest place first. The filing drawer in the study. Daniel had always called it our system, even though I was the one who kept it organized for years. Insurance policies in blue folders. Tax returns in green. Mortgage and property records in yellow. I pulled the drawer open and felt the first jolt immediately. The folders were there, but thinner. Not empty. Just edited. Like someone had gone through carefully and removed only what they did not want noticed. I sat in Daniel's desk chair and started checking one by one. The homeowner's insurance policy was current, but the renewal contact email was no longer mine. It had been changed to a company address I did not recognize. The life insurance beneficiary summary was missing entirely. The mortgage statements were there, but the auto-pay account listed on the most recent statement ended in numbers I did not know. I read it twice, then a third time. We had always paid the mortgage from our joint household account. Always. I opened my laptop, logged into our bank portal, and went still. The joint checking account was still active, but the balance was lower than it should have been by a margin large enough to make my mouth go dry. Not emptied. That would have been obvious. Just steadily reduced over time in a way designed to look like ordinary living. There were transfers labeled operating support, consulting reimbursement, reserve allocation. Business-sounding language. Clean. Bland. Invisible, unless you knew what the account looked like before. I clicked through 6 months of statements, then 9. My birthday dinner had not been the beginning of anything. It had been a performance staged after the real work was already underway. I copied every statement I could access and sent them to a new private email address I created in less than 2 minutes. Then I logged out, cleared the browser history, and sat back, listening. The house was quiet. Daniel had gone into the office around 10 after kissing the top of my head and telling me he was sorry about the weird dinner. He had said it the way someone apologizes for bad weather. I opened the property tax portal for Cook County and searched our address. The home was still listed in both our names. Relief came too fast, and because of that, I did not trust it. I kept digging. Permit records. A recent filing for a detached garage renovation I knew nothing about. Contractor estimate attached. Payment source. D. Carter Holdings. That stopped me. Daniel had always insisted the house was personal, separate from the business. No overlap. His rule. Until, apparently, it suited him otherwise. I checked our shared email archive next, the one we had used for utility notices and household confirmations. Buried between grocery receipts and streaming subscriptions, I found 3 messages from a financial advisory office in Naperville, all addressed only to Daniel, all forwarded automatically from an old filter I had set up years ago and forgotten. Subject lines so polite they were almost insulting. Revised structure options. Asset positioning follow-up, updated separation scenarios. My hand froze on the mouse. Separation scenarios. Not theory. Not jokes. Not Margaret being dramatic over wine. Scenarios. Plural. I stared at the screen until the words stopped looking like words and started looking like intent. Then I printed everything. Every statement. Every email. Every tax record. The printer in the study hummed and clicked, each page sliding out warm and precise, like proof had a sound. By the time the stack was finished, my heartbeat had steadied. I no longer felt confused. Hurt, yes. Humiliated, absolutely. But confusion was gone. They had been arranging the furniture of my life while I was still living in it. And the most chilling part was not how carefully they had moved things. It was how sure they were that I would never notice until they were done. That evening, I did exactly what Nina told me to do. I behaved normally. I made salmon with roasted asparagus and wild rice because it was Wednesday, and Wednesday dinners in our house had followed the same rhythm for years. I set the table for 2. I lit the small candle in the center, not because I felt romantic, but because routine can be a powerful disguise. When Daniel walked in just after 6:30, loosening his tie and carrying the sharp outside air in with him, He looked relieved to see me moving around the kitchen as if nothing had shifted. "Smells great," he said, kissing my cheek with the same casual affection that suddenly felt almost insulting. "How was your day?" I spooned rice onto his plate. "Quiet," I said. "I did laundry. Sorted some paperwork. Called Nina." His fork paused halfway to the table. "Not dramatically. Just enough." "Nina?" he asked. "That is random." I smiled and sat down across from him. "Not really." We had not talked in a while. He studied me for a second, then nodded and started eating. We made our way through dinner on harmless topics. A delayed vendor shipment at his warehouse. A neighbor's tree trimming crew blocking the alley. A new restaurant opening in River North. I answered when I needed to, listened when I had to, and kept my face as neutral as the linen napkins folded beside our plates. If he was nervous, he hid it well, but not perfectly. He checked his phone more than usual. He kept turning it face down, then picking it up again. At one point, the screen lit with a name I recognized before he flipped it over. Mother. After dinner, I cleared the plates and told him I was going upstairs to fold towels. I did fold towels. 2 full loads. Slow, precise stacks on the guest bed. Then, when I heard the back patio door slide open downstairs, I went still. Daniel only took calls outside when he did not want the walls to hear. I set the last towel down, crossed the hall barefoot, and eased open the small window in the upstairs landing just enough to let voices travel. The November air bit at my skin immediately, cold and clean. Below me, on the patio, Daniel stood with one hand in his pocket, the other pressed to his phone. His voice carried upward in pieces at first. "I know. No." She was upset. "Obviously, no. She is calmer today." Margaret's voice was faint but unmistakable, a bright little thread of steel through the speaker. I could not make out every word, but I did not need to. Daniel's answers were enough. No, she did not sign anything. Why would she sign it at dinner? A pause. "I told you it was too much too soon." Another pause, longer this time. He paced once across the patio stones. "I understand the point of it, Mom. I just think you pushed too hard." I gripped the windowsill until my fingers hurt. Too much too soon. Not a joke. Not confusion. Not me being sensitive. A tactic. A test. Margaret's voice rose just enough for one sentence to reach me clearly through the cold. If she panics, she will make mistakes. If she stays calm, we adjust. I closed my eyes. There it was. Clean as glass. They had not handed me those papers to humiliate me, though that had clearly been a bonus. They handed them to me to study my reaction, to see whether I would cry, scream, leave, beg, or sign. They were not improvising. They were calibrating. Daniel spoke again, lower now, the tone of a man trying to sound reasonable while already halfway inside the plan. "Susan said we need cleaner timing if we do this. No more surprises." My stomach turned so sharply I had to lean my shoulder against the wall to stay steady. Susan, the cousin, the lawyer, the one whose name sat neatly at the bottom of those pages like a signature on betrayal. I listened until the call ended, until the patio door slid shut, until Daniel moved through the kitchen below me humming softly under his breath, as if he had just finished discussing a budget meeting. Then I closed the window, picked up the folded towels, and carried them to the linen closet one careful stack at a time. My hands were steady now, steadier than they had been all day, because the worst part of betrayal is uncertainty. Once certainty arrives, even if it is ugly, it gives you something solid to stand on. And standing there in the upstairs hallway, with cold air still clinging to my skin, I understood exactly what they had done. My birthday dinner had not been the attack. It had been the rehearsal. The real performance, I realized, had not happened yet. The next morning, I stopped being the woman who waited for things to make sense. I became the woman who made copies. I dressed in jeans, a camel sweater, and low brown boots, tied my hair back, and moved through the house with the same calm I used when hosting Christmas dinner or meeting with contractors. Daniel left early for a breakfast meeting in Oak Brook, or at least that was what he said as he buttoned his coat and grabbed his travel mug. He kissed my forehead and told me not to overthink what happened with his mother. I smiled and told him I would not. That was the easiest lie I had told in years. The moment his car turned out of the driveway, I locked the front door, carried my folder into the study, and started building a second file. Not emotional notes. Not angry journal entries. Documents. Timelines. Dates. I labeled everything in black ink on clean manila tabs the way Nina taught me years ago when we were helping another friend through a messy probate fight. Financial transfers, property records, legal references, communication trail. Then I drove downtown to a copy center on Wabash because there are some things you do not print at home when the person you are protecting yourself from pays the internet bill. I fed page after page into the machine, the warm smell of toner filling the air while office workers in wool coats hurried past the windows with paper cups and briefcases. Every transfer, every statement, every email with the words asset positioning and separation scenarios, every screenshot of the law firm website, every page of the fake birthday joke. I made 3 copies. One for Nina, one for me, one for a safe deposit envelope I planned to open before the week was over. By noon, I was sitting in Nina's condo in the West Loop with the duplicate file spread across her dining table. She read in silence again, slower this time, circling dates with a red pen. Here, she said finally, tapping a transfer from 4 months ago. This is where. He started getting careless. He moved money from your joint account under business language, but the destination is not an operating account. It is a holding account. That means planning, not panic. She tapped another page. And this garage renovation permit? He may be trying to justify mixed funds later. Personal property upgraded with company money can become a legal argument if someone is trying to muddy ownership. I stared at the page, anger settling into something colder and more useful. So they are building confusion. Exactly, Nina said. Confusion is expensive. People with money create it because they assume the other person will get tired before the paperwork does. She leaned back and folded her arms. Which means your next move is simple. You do not expose everything. Not yet. You let them believe the rehearsal worked. That afternoon, I drove to a branch of our bank in Lincoln Park and asked for printed records for every joint account under the calm pretense of organizing taxes early. The teller smiled, stamped, and handed over more evidence than I had expected. 2 accounts I knew. 1 linked reserve account I did not. It was not hidden exactly. It was simply never mentioned. That is how respectable betrayal often works. It does not slam doors. It rearranges drawers. Back in my car, I sat in the parking lot with the heater humming and read the reserve account summary line by line. Opened 8 months ago. Authorized users, Daniel Carter and D. Carter Holdings. Not me, but seeded, in part, by transfers from our household account. I looked out at the bare winter trees lining the street and let the silence settle. There it was. The shape of it. The timing. The quiet siphoning. The legal prep. The family lawyer. The test at dinner. They had already decided what my role was supposed to be. Hurt wife. Startled woman. Emotional reaction. Bad paperwork. Fast settlement. But by the time I pulled into my driveway that evening, another thought had taken root, steady and undeniable. If my birthday dinner had been their rehearsal, then they had made one mistake. They performed it on a woman who had spent 20 years helping build a life they thought only belonged to him. And next time we sat at a table together, I would not be bringing cake. 3 days later, Margaret invited herself to dinner. Again, she did not ask, of course. She called Daniel while he was driving home and announced that she was in the neighborhood and thought it would be lovely if the 3 of us could sit down like adults and clear the air. Daniel repeated it to me in the kitchen with that same careful tone he used whenever he wanted me to cooperate with something he had already agreed to. I was standing at the counter slicing carrots for a pot roast I had not planned to make until he came home with that look on his face. Mom just wants to move past the awkwardness, he said. I smiled and reached for the Dutch oven. Of course she does. By 6:15, the dining room looked almost exactly the way it had on my birthday. Candles, cloth napkins, good china, the same hydrangea vase, though the blooms were fresher this time. I had spent the afternoon making sure every detail felt familiar, because people lower their guard fastest in rooms they think they already understand. Margaret arrived in a camel wool coat and glossy lipstick, carrying a bottle of red wine she never intended to open. She kissed the air near my cheek again and complimented the table setting as if she were touring a hotel suite. Daniel looked relieved the moment she sat down. That alone told me he still believed I was behind. We ate the first course with polite conversation. Margaret talked about a charity luncheon. Daniel talked about a warehouse lease. I asked whether anyone wanted more bread. If someone had walked in off the street, they would have seen a civilized family dinner. That is the thing about betrayal in respectable homes. It usually happens between the salad and the main course. When I set down the pot roast and ladled gravy onto Margaret's plate, she gave me a long, measured smile. "I do hope you are not still upset about the other night," she said. "I would hate to think a silly joke ruined your celebration." Daniel cleared his throat softly. He did not look at me. "Mom," he said, but there was no warning in it. Just theater. I folded my napkin once and placed it beside my plate. "Actually," I said, "I have been meaning to thank you for that envelope." Margaret blinked. "Just once." "Oh, yes. It encouraged me to get organized." Then I reached down to the empty chair beside me and lifted a cream-colored folder onto the table. Not dramatic, not slammed, just placed. The same way she had placed hers in front of my cake. Daniel's fork stopped in midair. Margaret's smile held, but only because women like her trained for that. "What is this?" she asked lightly. "A better joke," I said. I opened the folder and slid out the first document. The transfer logs from our joint account. The reserve account statement. The property permit tied to business funds. The printed emails with subject lines she never expected me to see. I placed them one by one on the white tablecloth between the wine glasses and the salt cellar, each page neat and visible. Daniel went pale before Margaret did. "Evelyn," he said quietly, the way people say your name when they hope it will stop time. I ignored him. "I especially appreciated learning what asset positioning means," I said, looking directly at Margaret. "And separation scenarios. Such elegant phrasing. Very tasteful." Margaret did not touch the papers. Her hands remained folded, pearls resting at her throat like armor. "You are misunderstanding business documents," she said. "Am I?" I pulled out the final page and set it on top. Susan Hale's partner profile from the law firm website. Her maiden name. Her firm. Her connection. Because from where I am sitting, it looks less like misunderstanding and more like conspiracy with family branding. Daniel stood up so fast his chair scraped against the hardwood. "This is not what you think." I turned to him then, and for the first time in years, I did not soften my face for his comfort. "No," I said calmly. "It is exactly what I think. And tomorrow morning, my attorney will think it too." The room went very still after that. Even the candle flames seemed to stop moving. Margaret finally looked down at the papers, then back at me, and I saw something I had never seen in her before. Not guilt, not shame, surprise. The kind that comes when a woman you dismissed as polite turns out to have been paying attention the entire time. I stood, smoothed my dress, and stepped away from the table. "You wanted to see how I would react?" I said. "Now you know." Then I carried my untouched plate to the kitchen and left them sitting there together in the dining room, surrounded by good china, cooling pot roast, and the paperwork they thought would only ever belong to me.